Hello students. In the last class, we learned what is respiration, the different types of respiration, and the stages of aerobic respiration. Now in this class, we are going to study about the respiratory system in man and the mechanism of breathing. Now the respiratory system in man consists of the nostrils, the nasal chamber, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, the alveoli, and the lungs. So the air enters through the nostrils, then it goes to the nasal chamber, passes to the pharynx, then to the larynx, then to the trachea, and then followed by bronchi, then the bronchioles, and the alveoli, which form the lungs. This figure will give you a better picture to describe the path the air takes once it enters into the nostrils. So the air passes through the nostrils into the nasal chamber, then to the pharynx. The pharynx serves as a common passage for food and for air. Then it goes to the larynx. The larynx, situated at the top of the trachea, is the voice box. It is the organ of sound production. So air passes through the larynx, then it enters into the trachea. Trachea is a long hollow tube supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings. This is meant to keep the trachea distended and prevent the trachea from collapsing. The trachea branches to form two bronchi, and each bronchus enters into the respective lung. Upon entering into the lung, the bronchus divides to form secondary bronchi. The secondary bronchi further branches to form the tertiary bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi end up with the bronchioles. The major difference between bronchioles and the bronchi is that the bronchioles are not supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings, whereas the bronchi, they have C-shaped cartilaginous rings to support them. You can still have a better picture of the pathway of air after it enters through the nostrils. It passes through the nostrils into the nasal chamber, then it goes to the pharynx. Pharynx serves as a common passage for food and for air. Air enters into the trachea and food will be entering into the esophagus. So while swallowing food, a structure called epiglottis closes the entrance of the trachea. So the food doesn't enter into the trachea while swallowing food. If the epiglottis is not closing the entrance of the trachea properly, some amount of food might enter into the trachea, which results in coughing. That is a reflex action to throw that unwanted substance which has entered into the trachea. Now this diagram gives you a very clear picture of the location of trachea, the larynx, and the formation of bronchi and bronchioles from the trachea. Now larynx is located at the top of the trachea. It is made up of two ligamentous folds called vocal cords. When air passes through the vocal cords forcibly, sound is produced. Therefore, it is known as the voice box. So after the air passes through the larynx, it enters into the trachea. So as you can see, it is a long hollow tube supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now these cartilaginous rings keep the trachea distended and prevent the trachea from collapsing. Then the trachea branches to form two bronchi, and each bronchus enters into the respective lungs. So this is the left lung and this is the right lung. Now upon entering into the lungs, the bronchus branches to form secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi further branch to form the tertiary bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi ultimately branch to form the bronchioles. The primary bronchi, the secondary bronchi and the tertiary bronchi are all provided with C-shaped cartilaginous rings, but the bronchioles are devoid of C-shaped cartilaginous rings. The bronchioles ultimately end up with numerous air sacs filling up both the lungs called alveoli. So we have two lungs which are made up of numerous alveoli or the air sacs. The human lungs are pinkish in color and spongy in nature. These are located in the thoracic cavity. Now you can observe over here, the left lung is slightly smaller than the right lung. In fact, the left lung is made up of 2 lobes, whereas the right lung is made up of 3 lobes. So here you can have a reasoning question. Why is the left lung slightly smaller than the right lung? The reason is the apex of the heart is slightly tilted towards the left. So, in order to accommodate the heart in between, the left lung is slightly smaller than the right lung. Now this diagram shows the gaseous exchange between the alveoli and the capillaries which are formed by the branching of the pulmonary artery. You know, pulmonary artery is an artery which carries deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle of the heart to the lungs. Now upon entering into the lungs, the pulmonary artery branches to form arterioles and the arterioles ultimately branch to form the capillaries. So this set of capillaries carry deoxygenated blood, which is denoted by the blue color. Now the alveoli are filled with air rich in oxygen when a person inhales. So there is gaseous exchange between the alveoli and the capillaries. Oxygen from the alveoli enters into the capillaries and carbon dioxide from the capillaries diffuse out into the alveoli. Thus, the blood which is carried by the capillaries become oxygenated. Now these capillaries carrying oxygenated blood denoted by the red color, they fuse to form the venules and the venules ultimately form the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein is a vein which carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart. So this figure explains the gaseous exchange between the alveoli and the capillaries and also the blood supply to the lungs. The next topic that we are going to take up is the mechanism of breathing. You all know that breathing is the physical aspect of respiration, the first phase of respiration. Physical aspect, which means it doesn't utilize any energy, neither does it produce any energy. So it is the physical aspect of respiration, doesn't utilize any enzymes either. Now here is a list of structures which play a role in breathing. Ribs, intercostal muscles, diaphragm and abdominal muscles. Ribs, as you know, we have 12 pairs of ribs intercostal muscles, the obliquely running muscles between the ribs, diaphragm, a strong muscular partition which separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, and the abdominal muscles, the muscles which are present in the abdomen. So these structures in coordination, they play a role in breathing. Breathing occurs in two steps, inspiration and expiration. Inspiration means taking in air rich in oxygen, and expiration or exhalation, it means giving out air rich in carbon dioxide. Now the video that you are about to see demonstrates the mechanism of breathing in man. Breathing occurs in two steps, inspiration or inhalation and expiration or exhalation. Inspiration or inhalation is the process of taking in air rich in oxygen. And exhalation or expiration is the process of breathing out air rich in carbon dioxide. When we inspire, the air passes through the nostrils into the nasal cavity, then it goes to the trachea or the windpipe, which bifurcates to form the bronchi, and then the air enters into the lungs. We have a pair of lungs located in the thoracic cavity, protected by the rib cage. Diaphragm is a muscular partition that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. When we inhale, the diaphragm falls flat and the volume of the thoracic cavity increases. Since the volume increases, the outside air, being at a higher pressure, enters into the lungs. Similarly, when we exhale, the diaphragm resumes its normal dome-shaped structure. The volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. The pressure of the air inside the lungs increases. As a result, air is forced out of the lungs through the nostrils. Now, besides the lungs and the diaphragm, the ribs also play a very important part in breathing. When we inhale, the external intercostal muscles contract. As a result, the ribs are pulled outwards and upwards. And when we exhale, the ribs are pulled downwards and inwards, increasing the pressure of the air inside the lungs. This diagram will give us the complete picture about the process of inspiration and expiration in man. As I have told you earlier, the ribs, the intercostal muscles, the diaphragm, and the abdominal muscles are the structures which play a role in the process of breathing in man. Now, how do we inspire or how do we inhale? When the external intercostal muscles contract, the ribs are pulled outwards and upwards. And the diaphragm, in the meantime, it contracts and it flattens. So the net volume of the thoracic cavity increases and the pressure of the air inside the lungs decreases. The atmospheric air, being at a higher pressure, rushes in through the nostrils and fills up the lungs. This is how we inhale. Now, expiration begins when the diaphragm relaxes and assumes its normal dome-shaped structure. The external intercostal muscles, in the meanwhile, relax and the ribs are pulled downwards and inwards. The net volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. As a result, the pressure of the air inside the lungs, it increases. So, the air is forced out of the lungs through the nostrils. So, this explains the exact mechanism in which we inspire and expire. So, in today's class, you learned about the respiratory system in man, under which you studied different organs of respiration and also the blood supply to the lungs. You also studied about the mechanism of breathing in man. Thank you, children.